David Miller should have walked away that night. Some part of him even knew it, the same instinct that makes you step back when you smell smoke before seeing flames. But friendship, real friendship, the kind forged in years of trust, has a way of blinding you, making you second-guess the shadows in a man's eyes. James Carter kept talking, his tone smooth, his smile sharp. He spoke about investors, business moves, opportunities. On the surface, it sounded like any other conversation they'd had over the years. But underneath, David could feel the shift. James wasn't warning him out of loyalty. He was probing, testing. "Listen," James finally said, leaning forward. "There's a deal coming through, big money. I can bring you in, but it's not exactly clean. Nothing too dangerous, just the sort of thing where we make our cut and get out before anyone notices. I wanted you on board because I know I can trust you." David frowned. "What kind of deal?" James shrugged, casual as ever. "The kind you don't put on paper, the kind that gets you enough cash to skip all the slow steps." The waitress came by with the check, and James slipped bills onto the table without looking. He always liked showing he had money, even when it wasn't his. David hesitated, every nerve telling him to refuse, to get up and leave. But he didn't. That was the first mistake. By the end of the week, David's company had collapsed. A random audit uncovered accounts he'd never seen, fraudulent signatures he didn't recognize, but all with his name attached. The contracts he'd worked so hard to secure evaporated. The police showed up at his apartment with questions he couldn't answer. And through it all, James was nowhere to be found. The betrayal unfolded like a slow knife. The people who had praised David days before now looked at him like a criminal. His employees scattered. Investors cut ties. Headlines painted him as a fraud. And when he finally saw James again, smiling at a press conference beside one of the very investors David had been working with, he understood. It had been a setup from the start. The trial was quick, brutal, evidence stacked against him. Emails, bank transfers, signed contracts, all forged, all perfect enough that even his lawyer couldn't argue them away. James never appeared in court, never had to explain a thing. David was sentenced to 7 years for fraud and embezzlement, his reputation shattered, his dreams reduced to ash. Prison stripped everything from him. His clothes, his dignity, his sense of time. The walls were gray, the food tasteless, the days endless. At first he thought about giving up, about letting the weight of it all crush him. But every night when he lay awake on the thin mattress, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, he saw James's face, that grin, that betrayal, and slowly, something inside him hardened. David Miller entered prison a broken man. He would not leave the same. Prison has a way of grinding men down until there's nothing left but dust. The first weeks nearly broke David. The noise, the stench, the constant eyes on him, predators circling, waiting to see if he was prey. He kept his head low, spoke little, followed the rules. But no matter what he did, the whispers followed him. Rich boy. Fraudster? Con artist? None of them knew the truth. But truth didn't matter behind bars. Reputation did. And David's reputation was mud. The first fight came on his 3rd week. A man twice his size cornered him in the showers, demanding cigarettes David didn't have. When he refused, the punches came fast, heavy, each one rattling his bones. He hit the ground bleeding, ribs screaming, breath gone. But something inside him, something raw and stubborn, made him stand back up. He swung. His fist connected with the man's jaw. Not hard enough to win, but hard enough to send a message. He spent the night in the infirmary, staring at the flickering ceiling light. His ribs throbbed, his face swollen, but his spirit burned hotter than it had in weeks. He realized then, if he wanted to survive this place, he couldn't just endure. He had to change. Months bled into years. David studied the men around him, their habits, their weaknesses, their hunger. He listened more than he spoke. In the library, he devoured books on law, business, psychology. At night, he replayed every detail of James's betrayal in his mind, mapping out where he had been blind, where he had trusted too much. He trained too. Push-ups, sit-ups, running laps in the yard until his lungs burned. Pain became routine. The body hardened. The mind sharpened. Slowly, the timid man who had, walked in, began to disappear. There were allies, too, in unexpected places. An older inmate named Marcus, serving life, taught him how to fight smarter, how to read people by the way they moved. "Watch the eyes," Marcus told him. "The body follows where the eyes go." Another inmate, a former accountant, showed him tricks in finance, how money could vanish and reappear with the right hands pulling strings. Piece by piece, David was rebuilding himself, not into the man he had been, but into something new, something colder, and always in the quiet hours of the night, when the prison settled into uneasy silence, he whispered the same name to himself, James Carter. The gates clanged open, and for the first time in 7 years, David Miller walked into the free air. The sky above seemed too wide, the sounds too sharp, the colors almost unreal after years of gray walls and steel bars. He didn't smile. Freedom wasn't a gift. It was a weapon, one he intended to use. He didn't go back to his old neighborhood. That man was dead. Instead, he vanished into the city's undercurrent, a ghost slipping between shadows. With money, Marcus had helped him. Hide before prison, David rented a small, anonymous apartment. Plain walls, secondhand furniture, a desk stacked with files. It wasn't home. It was a war room. The first step was information. James Carter was no longer just a slick-talking opportunist. He had become powerful. He ran a real estate empire. Now, one built on corruption, bribes, and broken promises. His face appeared on magazine covers, his name praised at charity galas. To the public, he was a self-made visionary. To David, he was still the same liar who had stolen everything. David started small. He followed the money, tracing shell companies, offshore accounts, shady contracts. He visited old contacts, people who owed him favors, people James had burned. Along the way, each conversation gave him another thread, another weakness. Slowly, a web formed. At night, he would sit in the dark with a glass of cheap whiskey, staring at James's photo clipped from a glossy business magazine. The grin was the same one David remembered from that cafe years ago. It fueled him. The first strike came quiet. One of James's smaller development projects, an apartment complex in the suburbs, suddenly collapsed under the weight of protests and lawsuits. Documents appeared online, exposing fraudulent safety inspections. Whispers of corruption began to spread. James denied everything, of course, but the damage was done. Investors grew nervous. David watched from the sidelines, unseen. He didn't want James ruined all at once. He wanted him to bleed slowly, to feel the walls close in the way David had felt in that courtroom. Every victory would be small, silent, but sharp enough to cut. And yet, revenge wasn't the only ghost chasing him. Some nights, when the city fell quiet, he thought about the people he had lost. Friends who abandoned him, a woman he once loved, but who had vanished from his life the moment the scandal broke. He wondered if she believed the lies, if she had chosen James's glittering world over his broken one. That thought burned almost as much as the betrayal itself. But David had learned, long ago, pain could be sharpened into purpose, and he would not stop until James Carter's empire turned to ash. The night of the gala was the kind of night James Carter lived for. Crystal chandeliers, velvet curtains, glasses of champagne that never emptied. The ballroom pulsed with the city's most powerful politicians, investors, celebrities, all laughing, all orbiting James like he was the sun itself. He stood at the center, polished and untouchable in his tailored suit, smiling for the cameras. And in the shadows at the edge of the room, David watched. 7 years of planning had led here. Every step, every small sabotage, every whisper planted in the right ear. It had all been building to this moment. James didn't know it yet, but the empire beneath his feet was hollow, ready to collapse with the push of one hand. David wasn't wearing prison rags anymore. He was sharp, confident, unrecognizable to anyone who hadn't looked into his eyes. And those eyes were locked on James with a hunger no champagne could wash away. The speeches began, the usual parade of praise and hollow words. James took the stage, raising his glass, thanking the city for believing in him. Cameras flashed, applause roared, but then the big screen behind him flickered, the applause faltered, and suddenly the truth filled the room. Emails, bank records, secret recordings, every forgery, every bribe, every betrayal James had built his empire on spilled across the screen for all to see. Gasps spread like wildfire. Investors stared in shock. Politicians turned pale. James froze at the podium, his grin shattering into panic as his perfect world crumbled in front of everyone who mattered. David stepped out of the shadows. Their eyes met across the room. For the first time, James looked small. Security swarmed. Guests whispered. The press surged forward like vultures. But David moved through the chaos until he stood just a few feet away. No cameras caught what passed. Between them, only the two men who had once been brothers. James's voice cracked, desperate, low enough only for David to hear. "You think this makes us even? You think this fixes what you lost?" David's expression didn't change. "No, but now you know how it feels." James lunged as if to grab him, but security pulled him back. Shouts filled the room. Someone yelled about handcuffs. Reporters snapped photos like lightning. David turned away. He didn't need to watch the rest. The world would devour James. Carter now, piece by piece the way he had devoured David years ago. Outside, the night air was cool against his face. For the first time in 7 years, he could breathe without the weight of rage pressing on his chest. The city lights stretched out before him, loud, alive, indifferent. He lit a cigarette, inhaled deeply, and exhaled into the dark. Revenge hadn't brought peace. It never could. But it had given him something else. Justice. And as he walked into the night, leaving James to choke on his own ruin, David Miller knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would never be a victim again.